Hi, this is Editor Xenia here. I was editing through my How to Outline a Book video and realized that I still wanted to provide more context and more of an example of how to turn an idea into an outline. So that's what this video is. It's quite long, so if you're intending to watch the whole thing, buckle in. But it is a full demo of how to take a book all the way through the outline process, starting from a randomly generated idea, going right through. I hope you like it. Take care. So as I mentioned, we'll be using a randomly generated prompt. I'm using a Reedsy story plot generator. And I generated a random fantasy plot because that's kind of my genre. So it's given us that there is a nomad who can be brusque. I don't know how you're supposed to say that. The secondary character is an elven prince who is misunderstood. It wants it to be a political fantasy story about unlikely friendship that kicks off on a moonlit beach with a death in the family. It notes that someone in the story has a reputation to salvage, and there's a twist. You should write the story in the second person POV. We will definitely not be doing that. It's not a POV I drive with, but everything else, let's see what we do. So as I mentioned in my other video, I usually start with a brainstorm, noting down the points that I'm taking from my daydreaming or my inspiration. So the thing I've held is that it's got a brusque nomad, it's got a misunderstood elven prince, it starts on a moonlit beach with a family death, and someone has a reputation to salvage. So the first thing to do, in my mind, is to start filling these in, start finding details, asking questions. So the immediate question that jumps to my mind is who's dying on a moonlit beach? Why are they dying on a moonlit beach? And of course, there's lots of reasons why that might be happening. So for example, there could have been a shipwreck. I'm thinking maybe a Viking battle, and that leaves the question, are we on the attacker's side or the defender's side? Or some kind of ritual that might require moonlight in some way. I can't think of any other options right now, but we can always come back to it. But I think it's really logical on the next bullet point. Someone has a reputation to salvage. It makes sense to me that it would be the misunderstood elven prince because he's misunderstood. Something's happened there. We'll fill in that blank. I'll do a little more filling in and we'll revisit this together. Welcome back. So starting at the top with our brusque nomad. Why is he a nomad? That's my immediate question. He could be a monk, a mercenary, maybe a shepherd or a traveling merchant. I'm going to call him Todd just for now. Moving on to our misunderstood elven prince. I've named him George, spelt terribly. Apologies to anyone named George who spells it like that. I decided he was probably tall, and in my head, nobility has to be either imperious or like whining and entitled, so I went with imperious. I thought he has a small gang of servants bound to serve until death. And then that got me thinking. And that's why I brainstorm. Because once you get the obvious, easy stuff out of the way, it leaves room for your brain to start percolating. So having a small gang of servants that serves until death, are they slaves? Do elves have slavery? Does everyone have slavery? Is it even slavery? Do I want to open that can of worms? Because obviously that's, a big topic to cover. And especially as who I am, I might not be the best person to address that. And I thought, well, what if they're dead? Is it, that's a different area. It's like zombie servants. And then I really got going, what if they're like dead, but they're his ancestors and they retain their memories and their souls and whatever. But the family is cursed. So if you don't do enough to serve your people in your lifetime as a monarch, you are forced to serve your kin until your kind of service quota is met. And I really like that idea. In my opinion, it's these ideas that kind of start lighting you up where you kind of go, ooh, that's, and like actually reacting rather than, he could be this, he could be that. Those are the tidbits you want to grab hold of because they're what's going to make your story that interesting and desirable for your readers as well. Pay attention to what lights your fire. Now, as you fill in details here, you're going to want to go back to what you've already done and take anything out that doesn't fit anymore. So in my opinion, the stuff we're starting to get about spirits and princes and things, I'm thinking that the nomad's probably going to be helping the prince. And I'm feeling monk and shepherd aren't as on point. Mercenary and traveling merchant, maybe he's even like a monster hunter and he's selling the things that he hunted as a mercenary. Something like that. So we can tidy up our notes as we go. So, because we know that, for me anyway, the thing about the curse on the royal family and their spirits having to serve on after death is really interesting for me, I'm going to dig deeper into that. So, of course, the first question is, well, who decides when their service is complete? So, it could be the family matriarch or patriarch, a god or spirit. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if it was the other ghosts? So, you've got a crew of ancestors following you around helping you. What if they got to decide when each other helps? And I thought, well, why wouldn't they just let each other free immediately? And then what if their debt, when they were freed, is passed on to the others so they're not motivated to let each other go? Only a really, truly undeniable service can kind of guilt them into admitting that the person should be free. And then I took that one further and I thought, well, what if they tricked or used magic somehow to make just one servant take on all of their debts? I bet that one person would be pretty cross. There'd probably be a lot of emotions there. It'd probably make a pretty interesting character. With that done, we keep moving down our bullet points and let's flesh out a little bit more the starts on a moonlit beach with a family death. And I was thinking through it and I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if it was like a ritual or something after a Viking style amphibious attack? So using all our points basically. And what if the king or the leader dies and poor George is mourning them? The attack was planned, of course. The baddies set up an assassination that was meant to kill all of the family line. George saw or heard something that made it clear it was not a random attack. And then here we go. We've got an inciting incident. We've got, a bit of action. He's got an obvious task of finding out who did this and avenging his family. So we're getting going here. There's some juice here. Our next bullet point is the Elven Prince is misunderstood or has a reputation to salvage. The obvious question is why, or how does he know that, or how does that tie in with what we know has just happened? So I brainstormed that George could get back to civilization just to learn that he's being blamed. He's being framed for what's happened. That's the misunderstanding. Perhaps he gets there and he finds that people are like more mad than is reasonable. Like they're not listening to his side or anything. And then maybe that's because whoever the bad guys are wanted to undermine his words and use some kind of magic to make the masses believe that this guy was really, really guilty. And that, of course, pushes the question, well, who are the baddies? So we get the obvious out of the way, uncles and aunts, viziers, the classics. And then I thought, well, what about if, the spirit tender, like the person who has to interact with these spirits and is in charge of like honoring them, because they are still, ancient royalty, perhaps wanted to be free of the cursed family and their job. And I thought, well, why wouldn't they just quit? Like don't know about that. I thought, what about if it's that one spirit? We know he's cross. What if he thinks that if the bloodline ends, he'll be free? And I quite liked that idea. I ran with that. Another thing I kind of like about this story idea and the having a randomly generated prompt and getting to sort of pull things together is that you end up with some cool aesthetics, like ideas that don't naturally go together. So, for example, in this one, Viking elves, like you just don't mix those two very often. Elves tend to be very dainty and delicate, whereas Vikings are more hardy and savage. And I think that could potentially be a very cool merging. Like what if they grew their ships from seed and things like that? Like we could get some cool stuff going here. So now that we have sort of a rough framework, let's look at what our impetus for change is. That's pretty easy. It's probably the assassination attempt. And then we can start looking at, okay, what do the characters want badly enough to make stupid choices about? And what's stopping them from getting it? So we're going to start with Todd, who's our human nomad mercenary character. And I immediately ran into the problem of I don't really know anything about him. I only wrote 2 bullet points. Okay, not a problem. Got to go back, got to fill him out, learn a little more about this guy. So looking at what we do know, he's a mercenary. How does that fit into the plot we have so far? Well, we know that people were hired to kill the royal family, so it kind of makes sense he'd be one of them. So I've put down one of the assassins. And I thought, okay, well, if he's an assassin, he's part of this group. How is he a nomad? And I thought, well, maybe he was kicked off the job. It was pretty brusque and unpleasant. So why not for drunkenness? And then I thought, well, that's not really, it doesn't make his story more interesting. So I thought, what if he was sleeping with the assassin boss's partner? I was quite happy with that. So if we go back to trying to get everybody's wants done, it went much smoother this time because I knew a bit more about Todd. He wants his true love and to kill her husband because he thinks the husband's abusive. We don't know if he is or not. We might find that out as we keep going. And I think he has the secondary motivator of money because don't we all, especially if he's a mercenary. The thing stopping him, of course, is the husband and logistics. He needs a boat and a crew to take back his lady love. A little twist I wanted to add in is that he's not even sure the wife would choose him over her husband, especially if she knew that he had anything to do in the husband's demise. Our elven prince, George, he wants to clear his own name and regain his throne, and I started thinking a bit more. I said, is this really what he wants? Like, is leadership what's in his heart, or is he after, just a calm, peaceful life, but he doesn't know what happens if he dies without a bloodline and he hasn't done his service? Like, that's a very weird area for him. I ended up not following that thread, but that's part of the brainstorm, is you write down everything, and some things might get grabbed and some things might stay, and that's totally fine. The things standing in his way are, of course, the people who have stepped into the power vacuum, whoever these, it's not the main baddie because we know that's Ghost Boy, but the people who are benefiting from this situation. The other thing that's stopping him is the magic that's turning everyone against him. Our ghost servant, who I've named Nadir, wants freedom. That one's super easy. He wants his afterlife back. What's stopping him is that his kin live. He has to serve them. That's the curse. The curse itself is stopping him, and he cannot possibly do a great enough act of service to cancel out the huge cost he's inherited from all the other ancestors. No matter how many cups of tea you make and bring, that's not going to cut it. The next step is squeezing the plot out of what we have so far. So the plot is, of course, the actual actionables. What are your characters doing that we follow along and watch and that makes a story? So I usually, at this point, try to just hit a bullet point per kind of scene or big action item until I've kind of got some kind of flow from beginning to end. So, for example, you want to start your book in the middle of some kind of action event, something that'll grab the reader, a really good hook. So I'm thinking, what if George is mid-escape? The assassination is happening. He is escaping as we speak. The attackers are on a board. He sees the other ship go down, sees his family slain. He's running and asks Nadir, what do I do? And Nadir gives him bad directions because, of course, Nadir wants him to die. He ends up jumping for it into the water, and his cousin's also there. She casts some kind of water-breathing spell on him, and as she's casting it on herself, she gets shot with a crossbow bolt. He dives to safety. Cut to the next scene. He's searching the flotsam of these ships for survivors. Nadir urges him to search longer so that the assassins can find him, but he decides that, no, I'm not going to find anything. I'm going to go find an inn so at least I can be warm and get some food. He's grieving, he's upset, maybe he screams at the sky or does something a little more elfy or unsettling. Make it really hurt. Make the audience understand that this is a really big deal for him to lose his whole family. Next scene, he's lost and it takes him an extra few days to find an inn, so the scene would actually start at him arriving at the inn and announcing himself. The people in the inn get extremely upset. They blame him for the attack and try to mob him. A random half-drunk human, it's Todd, saves him. Todd is immune to the bard magic because he already knows that George was meant to die too. So, of course, it's not his doing. Next scene, George and Todd and Nadir make camp with Todd's supplies, and Todd both comments on George's uselessness and asks about Nadir. This is a really good opportunity for exposition, but of course we need to be careful not to go overboard and write an essay. Todd then would say that he knows the crew that attacked George's boat and asks what George will do with them if he regains the throne. George says, well, they committed treason, I'ma kill them. But Todd talks him into leaving the wife alone if Todd helps him figure things out. At this point, I'd already spent 2 hours on this document, so I decided I wasn't going to do a full bullet point list out because I'm not actually planning to write the story, but I did kind of summarize what I would do for the rest of it so you can still get an idea of the flow. This is a really long process. It is a mentally taxing process. I highly recommend you try not to do all of this in one day or one sitting. Take lots of good breaks, take time to noodle, and understand that you'll probably redo a few of these bullet points a few times. You'll find plot holes and have to overhaul things. It happens. It's a long process. In my mind, it's very, very worth it, and it's going to give you the first comprehensive look at your story, which is pretty incredible. So hang in there. So like I mentioned, I just wrote out the rest of kind of the story, but not scene by scene. So our act two, if you will, I figured they need to create a cover. They need to keep the prince under wraps so people don't get cross with them. They need to get into the palace or the place of power to investigate. They're going to need to avoid the assassins who are coming after them. And they're probably going to, we're going to need to put in some foreshadowing that Nadir is indeed the villain, have him give bad hints, things like that. So, of course, at this point, maybe a little earlier if we were doing this properly and like really sitting with each step, we need to figure out, okay, well, how is Nadir's villain arc working? So I decided that Nadir, the spirit, wants freedom, and he's managed to talk the spirit keeper, the person who's got to hang around and worship him, to be a part of this plot, hire the assassins, that sort of thing. The spirit keeper is probably either fanatical in some way or maybe a little impaired in some way that makes him follow instructions without too much question. I also decided that the spirit needs to return to the palace or some place of power to rejuvenate in some way, maybe every night, every few nights, something like that. And of course, when he's doing this, he's telling the spirit keeper where they are, what's going on, what the prince is up to, so that bands of follow-up assassins can be sent, inconveniences can be thrown their way, and just generally to give them a hard time. He also instructs the spirit keeper at this point to tell, I'm saying a family friend, it could be an uncle or something, who knows, an aunt, about the plot, and basically say, look, they're all dead. I'll support your claim. You should be ruler. So that they can have someone powerful on their side who will attempt to usher things in the direction they want. And of course, the friend's motive, the family friend's motive, is going to just be power. That's an easy one, power and influence. So going back to our outline here, our climax is, of course, he's going to confront the family friend. George and Todd will confront them. They've become friends along their journey, and they're together, and they're going to confront the person who's apparently, red herring, taken the throne. The head assassin man is there, arguing his payment. The family friend won't pay, as he knows there is a survivor, the job's not done. So as the good guys are about to win, the spirit keeper comes out of nowhere and stabs George. There's a revelation that Nadir was the impetus for the attacks in the first place, but the stab isn't fatal. Todd can't come to his aid because he's wrapped up in the fight with the family friend and the assassin husband man. So George has to try to escape, while Nadir, who's grown a lot during the story and maybe even fallen into love or into a deep bond of friendship with George, is apologizing and trying to explain himself and say, look, I didn't mean for it to go this way, or I did, but not like this, and all that big emotional drama. George comes to a dead end, and as he turns to face his end, he forgives Nadir as much as he can for his part in it. The spirit keeper isn't listening to Nadir, who's now pleading for him to stop. So Nadir throws himself in the way of the knife, sacrificing his quasi-physical form for George. As Nadir re-dies or disappears or evaporates, whatever his quasi-body does, the spirit keeper is distraught because he had one job and he was a big fan of the spirit. And George tries to lend comfort and thank Nadir. At this moment, Todd runs in and comes to a halt as he sees the situation. They're all in grief. It's a very sad moment. Then cue the magic lights, as Nadir's ultimate sacrifice is enough of a service to set him free. A nice little uptick at the end. Then we cut to the denouement, with the family friend dead at Todd's hands. His magical influence fades, and George is able to take the throne. He insists on doing more for himself now, though he probably still has some servants, and is endeavoring to be a good ruler. You could also have the curse be broken by these acts. You could have him say, okay, we're not going to be the royal family anymore. We are going to put someone more deserving on the throne, and then maybe that'll break the curse. If you want to address the curse, that's a good time to do it. I decided not to address the curse. They still just have to keep serving. I might work on that more if I was actually going to write this book, but I'm not, so I'll leave it there. But you get the gist, you get the process. As I mentioned in my other video, a lot of people stop here and just start writing their story. That's perfectly valid. Personally, I have a couple more steps I follow to make sure I have as comprehensive an outline as possible, and it really cuts down on the work at the end of the day, for me, in my opinion. So the next step I usually do, especially if I have a project that's playing with time, either as a storytelling tool or as a literal time travel piece, is to make a timeline chart, as it were. And I'll do this for any story, even if it's not playing with time, but it's especially important in those instances. So the way I like to do it is I have the timeline on the left in a column, and if I have a calendar system in the world, I'll use those dates, but for this, we'll just say day 1 of events, day 3 of events, etc. As you can see, I then put the main characters in the following columns, as well as a column for other or antagonist, or if there's a plague or something that's going to progress throughout the story, that goes in there. And then as we go through, we can see what everybody's up to on each day. So even if we're not looking at them, it's in our minds what they're doing. As an example, in this story, on day 1, George's family is attacked. George escapes. Todd has been spurned. He's drinking away his sorrows in a pub. He's probably making his way via the land route to wherever he thinks his lover is going to be at the end of their journey, so probably George's hometown. Nadir is attempting to get George killed without looking like he's trying to get George killed. Probably can't act directly against the one he's starting to serve, or else this would be a very quick story. In the other column, we have that assassins are assassinating. The spirit keeper is probably bringing the family friend into the plan at this point, saying, well, you may as well use your magic to make everybody mad at George. And the family friend begins sowing the seeds of discord when they get the news of the survivor from Nadir. Now, I went on to say day 3 because in my mind, I'm thinking that Nadir and the family friend and the spirit keeper need a bit of time to get their part together for word to get out far enough that it makes sense people be mad at Nadir by the time he gets to an inn. So I said day 3. But this is why we do timelines, because on day 3, we've got that George washes up in the wee hours of the morning, checking for flotsam, and then he leaves for the inn. That implies that he spent an entire day at sea. So that might be fine, but as an author, I would probably go and do my due diligence and see how likely that is, how survivable that is. And maybe it's more survivable for elves than it is for people, but it sounds a bit far-fetched to me. So I have to think about that. Maybe he's been gripping on to some of said flotsam and that helped him survive. But it's something to consider. It's why we do these timelines, so you can look and kind of be like, is that gap weird? And consider moving them around. But then, of course, if he does wash up sooner, how do the bad guys get the word out that quickly? So you kind of end up doing a bit of a balancing act. For this, I decided that an elf is hardy enough, long-lived enough, they need less fresh water, all that good stuff, to last a full day free-floating in the ocean, but he's going to be beaten up and tired. So on day 3, he washes up, checks the flotsam, and heads for the inn. Todd arrives at the same inn and is probably playing cards to win some coin because he didn't get his job, he's poor now. Nadir is doing whatever is in his power to slow George down so the assassins can find him. And the assassins probably don't realize they've missed somebody and are heading to the palace to claim their payment, while the friend is making sympathetic noises and holding a funeral for the family he loves so much, trying, of course, to get any important advisors or influencers on his side. On the night of the same day, George arrives at the inn, he gets mobbed, he runs away with Todd. Todd sees this rundown fop walk in, realizes that this man is a living symbol of his rival's failure, and rescues him from the mob. Nadir is probably trying to help until the mob gets too wild, and then I think he's going to go ethereal to save his own skin, and that is important because, of course, later he's going to sacrifice himself, so it shows that personal growth clearly. So that's most of what I do for a timeline. I follow it all the way down through all our events of note and get it all filled in, do a lot of cross-referencing, try to figure out if the dates make sense. And then crucially, especially because I write almost exclusively stories that happen from multiple point of views, I will go through each day, each event, and say, okay, is the bar fight going to be more interesting, or the mob attack going to be more interesting from George's point of view, as someone who shows up and he's confused and doesn't understand why people hate him, or Todd's point of view, who is having this realization that this person could be proof against his rival? And the answer might be it's George's point of view until the mob starts getting rowdy, and then we cut to Todd. So it helps you kind of frame things using the most interesting viewpoint. One thing to keep in mind while you're going through this whole process is the visuals. Try to think of your scenes and your outline in a very cinematic way. It'll help you to plan scenes that look good in the reader's mind, that flow together in an interesting and action-y way, and can just generally lead to some really detailed and cool descriptions because you've already thought about how it looks. So once our timeline's all done, it's time to actually get our formal outline together. This step, depending how much you've done in the previous, can take the longest. It's almost always the longest word count-wise. How I generally do it is I'll start a document. Sometimes I'll keep it my same old one, but usually not, so I can have a page on each screen. And you'll want to name the scene, so I'm calling this the attack. You'll want to list what characters are involved. In this scene, it's going to be George, Nadir, the assassin and his crew, and of course, George's family members. In a real book, by this point, you'd probably have names for all the key members. So in this case, the assassin would likely have a name. You'll want the when, whether that's your in-setting date, or in this case, day one. And if you're having a story where there's going to be separate point of views, you'll want to put whose point of view a chapter's going to be written from. Ideally, when you're choosing your point of view, you want to think through whose is going to be the most interesting, not whose makes the most sense or which character do you like the best, but whose point of view is the most interesting. To do this, I usually start with whatever we had in the bullet point for this scene. So this is exactly copy-pasted from that very first bullet point. And then from there, I kind of expand, flesh it out a bit, try to get just a bit more. So let's see that. So now I've got it a bit more fleshed out. George is fighting or escaping a crew member as the scene starts. He manages to tangle them up and slip away, but there's carnage wherever he looks, and the faces are familiar. His families, guards, and crew are dead around him. He thinks they still have a chance if only their second ship can reach them and he can get to his father's side. He probably thinks to himself, like, oh, where's that damn Nadir? Useless when it really counts, just to sort of set the tone of their relationship up very early. He sees his father's guards are down, and his father is fighting the head assassin guy, Hubby, from our earlier notes. Father spots him and spots the son, George, and calls out a warning just as the father gets stabbed. George falls to his knees in grief, but just gets missed by the blow his father was trying to warn him about. He scrambles away, runs towards the deck at top speed, but enemies seem to be at every turn. Nadir appears and gives him bad directions. He runs into a crewman and just barely manages to win the skirmish, probably through something lucky. He makes it to a cabin, so he couldn't make it to the deck because the crew member was in the way. He was getting bad directions, but he makes it to a cabin with a porthole or window or some kind of opening large enough to crawl through and drops into the sea. He starts swimming to his other ship when he hears his cousin call for him. He shouts to swim for the second ship, and she tells him it's taken too. He looks closer and confirms it. He swims to join his cousin behind some semi-concealing flotsam. His cousin tells him they'll swim for it and to hold still. She casts a spell. As she begins casting on herself, she cries out as a crossbow bolt slams into her back. She tells him to swim and dives. He joins her, pulling her deeper when he realizes he can breathe underwater, and he feels the moment she dies, and I feel like that would be a good spot to end that scene. So as you can see, it's a lot more fleshed out, a lot more detailed. Now, one of the reasons I like to go through and do all these different iterations is because every layer I do, I always come up with more questions about the world, more like, oh, shoot, that's a plot hole, or why does this happen, or why doesn't that happen? So for example, in this scene, as I was writing it, I realized, hang on, all these family members are dying. Why aren't they becoming spirit servants? So that would need to be addressed. I'm assuming it was some kind of ritual, or maybe there's an artifact that automatically causes all of their debts to go to Nadir. Something like that, but you'd have to sit and noodle on it. What is the magic system? Does the main character have magic? I probably, in a normal setting, would have figured this out as part of the fleshing out all the characters and the setting step, that very first step. And of course, did medieval ships have openings large enough to crawl out of? I might choose to say that elven ones do, and that's totally fine. But I should look into it and discover if they did, and if they didn't, why? Can a ship not sustain an opening that big, for structure reasons, just so that if I choose to subvert what was done, I have a reason for doing it, or something that goes around the problem. And that's my process. I just do all of those steps for the entire story, and I go back and I revise until I'm happy with what I have and I'm excited to write. And I just want to remind you, this process takes a really long time to do well. For my books, I usually budget a month to do it, and I write for about 45 minutes, 5 days a week when I'm working. So don't expect to get it done quickly, and don't get frustrated if it takes a while. Go as deep as you can into your characters, into your settings, write practice scenes to kind of get used to everybody, get a feel for their voices, and you'll do just fine. So I know this was a longer video. Thank you for hanging in. I hope there was some useful tips and advice, and that the demo can help you form your own story. If you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with other author friends, I'd really appreciate it. If you like to read, if you like dark fantasy, or if you just want to support an indie author, do check out my books. They're available on Amazon or through xeniaplatin.ca. I'd really appreciate the visit, and thank you so much for watching. Take care, and until next time, happy writing.